You're a doctor and you're a psychotherapist and you are very sensual on your Instagram page. I've even been told that I'm a thirsty therapist. But I really believe that I can take a stand for the integration of all these parts. There's so much cultural conditioning around a woman being in her sensual expression or wearing certain things and then also wanting to be taken seriously.
And how is your creativity a part of that? How does your artist express in that?
Oh my God, that's so beautiful. So
Dr. Kat Meyer, thank you for joining me on the Creative Path podcast.
yeah.
I really am excited to go into this with you because you are right now at the leading edge of one of the most exciting and taboo areas of study, which is sex and psychedelics.
Yes.
So can you tell people just tell them about your work, where you're at and what you're doing?
Yeah. So I've been a psychotherapist for about 13, 14 years and specifically in sex therapy and with trauma. And then over the years, being in the psychedelic world and incorporating ketamine-assisted therapy and then psychoeducation and setting up parameters for people to be able to go into this more safely to know what the fuck they're doing. So then I've been speaking on stages around both the intersection of these two pieces, the safety of it, but then also the ancient practices and mysteries that were influenced by this exact intersection.
And so for people who may have never even heard of this before, I imagine there's some people that psychedelics and sex as a therapy is unknown and never heard of before. Can you just enlighten us to why this is so important right now, why you've decided to dedicate really your focus towards it?
Yeah. Well, psychedelics can really help us with what we know in research is that psychedelics can really help us with depression. You know, things like MDMA or psilocybin, even ketamine can really help us with depression, PTSD, overcoming anxiety, even couples therapy. So if we look at it from the neurological standpoint, it can really help us to be able to rewrite narratives or helps us to be able to expand our awareness around what's impacting our blocks and our barriers and even how we see and operate, with our patterns. MDMA and ketamine are also really powerful with increasing the threshold of what we can tolerate emotionally and physically so that we can, for an example, in couples therapy, some of those challenging conversations that we just can't get past because we keep butting heads and we can't see our partner on the other side of it, or we feel that their perspective is threatening to us. Both of these can help to soften us and help us to access greater compassion for ourselves and vulnerability so that we can meet with our partner. And we can hold some of these bigger emotions in a way that doesn't dysregulate us as much.
Well, so where is the balance of it increasing our capacity to do that versus causing us to be so in a loving space that maybe we say or do things that aren't actually so true to us? Because I find that in medicine space, right? A rule that I've had to create for myself is not to make any major decisions in or right after, in the afterglow of like an ayahuasca ceremony, right? Okay, this is what I feel and I'm going to sit on that. I'm going to wait on that.
Yeah.
And so I could imagine, for example, I'm in a relationship, it's not going well, I'm thinking about breaking up, we do MDMA together and it's all love and whatever. But actually it's probably a good idea for us to break up. But because of the MDMA, I'm in that love space and love bubble again. Yeah. Where is that balance? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, and you're right. And these are the things that I warn people about because exactly that can happen. And we can fall in love where that's not necessarily, we fall in love and mistake that as we need to be in a relationship. But we can also have MDMA experiences where people break up in love. And so I think that's a really important to emphasize. I also really highlight the importance of having therapy or coaching on both before and then after to help make sense of this and to help both people to ground into the experience. So it does, I mean, there's so much here. The way that we prepare for a ceremony is just as important as the ceremony itself. So during that preparation, whether this is just a couple that's wanting to work through something or this is a sexual exploration, you know, what are we setting up here? As in what are the desires that we want to get into? What are the intentions that we have that we want to work on? What are our boundaries? What are the limits of our availability? What is it that, what are our limits of even the body inclusion of this? You know, we want to emphasize consent, especially before we go into that space, because again, what we will tolerate and what we'll be okay with can increase. So having that ahead of time helps us to make these decisions from a sober state and not just an altered state. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in regards to, they might go into that experience and be able to reconnect with the love that was there. But then afterward, how are they integrating and making sense of that? You're right. If we make some of these major decisions in the afterglow of a psychedelic, and sometimes that can be a couple of days and sometimes that can be a week or 2 weeks, it's important for that to settle so that we're not just riding the urgency of the energy that's brought forth from us, mm-hmm. because we're still in a state of, I kind of liken it to the beginning stages of love, like limerence. Mm-hmm. And in limerence, like everybody's their best self and we love everything about the other person. But once that drug and those chemicals settle, then we also look at our partner and maybe we're not as tolerant as some of these things. Maybe we're not as willing to do what we genuinely, I really believe this, genuinely felt that we were able to do or we were available to do that.
And limerence is the honeymoon phase.
Yeah, limerence is the honeymoon phase. Yeah. Yeah. So like ultimately we're run by chemicals, we're run by hormones, so as much as we can take all of this and slow our processes down and not just make decisions based on urgency or based on the intensity of an emotion or a feeling in the body can really help us to get into the nuances of what's going on.
So this is the Creative Path podcast.
Yeah.
And there's a deep focus on creativity, the creative process, the creative flow, et cetera. And mm-hmm. what I really respect about you, and I've said this to you so many times, which is that you are someone who has so much knowledge and study. I mean, licensed therapist, when you decide, for example, to go into sex and psychedelics, you like training and study and getting as much information as you can to mm-hmm. really ground it into science and true learning. Mm-hmm. You've always been a student, and I love that about you. And you also have such a creative, artistic side to you as well that's very experiential and sensual and somatic. And you have a poetry book a book of poetry that is just so beautiful that I recommend. What is the name of it?
Sex, Love, Yoga.
Sex, Love, mm-hmm. Yoga. That's out. That's so good. And I was honored to be one of the early reads of it. And so, and your paintings, oh my gosh, your paintings. I just think of your paintings. I just
Go on.
I know so much of your creativity. And so where I'm curious about is, as someone who considers himself an artistic entrepreneur, right? And I see you as an artistic entrepreneur. How are you seeing creativity mm-hmm. and using creativity in this space? Because it is sort of the wild, wild west right now. It's a new frontier. You are mm-hmm. innovating into an entirely new arena, mm-hmm. Both entrepreneurially, but also as a field of almost scientific study. And how is your creativity a part of that? How does your artist express in that?
Oh my God, that's so beautiful. So, at the beginning we were talking a lot about the science of it, the psychology of the work that I was introducing to you. But there's also an energetic and embodied and erotic experience of psychedelics, just in general. And people oftentimes will tell me, no, I just get stuck in my head with psilocybin. But it's because there's like this segmentation between their mind and the cognitive part of it and the embodied energetic experience. And all of these parts coexist at the same time. So how are we interweaving these is really important. The archetype of Eros is this idea of aliveness in our body, aliveness, life force energy, even, if we tie that into the science, the nervous system energy. And the more that we open ourselves up or free ourselves from these limiting beliefs and these constructs of how to behave, how to express, how to do this, it opens us up to, more spontaneity, more playfulness, more connection and pleasure and sensuality that exists literally everywhere, but we don't have access to it until we free ourselves. So that's where I see psychedelics can be really, really helpful. When somebody can learn that the somatic experience with psychedelics will transform the healing in a totally different way, it can open them up to greater energy in their everyday life. Now, creative process is very similar. Like as an artist, I like to think of myself as being as the divine creative force moving through me, and I'm a conduit for that. But the only way that I can allow that to move through me is if I find openness, if I unclench my body, if I feel myself, if I give myself space and time to be in stillness or to be in expression, to, open that. I really want to use this word, so I'm just going to use it. Let it really penetrate me. Mm-hmm. And rather than me chasing something, just allowing myself to be open to it and moved by it. So I think that psychedelics can really teach us that. And that's actually the way that I have built everything that in my company too, of I am present to conversations, to my experiences, to my inner feelings in my body. And I'm curious about each of these things. So I am given different inspirations across time. And when I have a new nugget of information that will light up and make sense of another inspiration that I had months ago, it's like the map is revealing itself in its own time and its own maturation. I cannot rush that. The moment I try to rush that, I get really heady and frustrated.
So where is the balance for you then between your inner artist and your inner entrepreneur, right? Mm-hmm. Because I run a program called Artistic Entrepreneur. Yeah. It's a brand new program that is really about, for me, a core conflict that I've had throughout my life of my inner artist that wants freedom to express, just wants to express what's true and not have to do it for any other reason than that's what's true and what feels good and be valued for that. Yeah. And then the inner entrepreneur inside of myself that's saying, but there should be a reason. There's something that you're building. There's an impact that you're making and you can make money from it and see it grow. And this is my inner feminine and inner masculine, right? And so I've found that along the way, there has been that conflict. And you were just speaking to how much it's a very feminine receptivity to how you go about things. And I also know you have a crazy work ethic. Yeah. And you do a lot. And so how do you balance the two in a way that feels like they're actually in harmony? Yeah, good question. So the first thing is I create space for each of these to exist and for me to feed them and nourish them. Similarly with eroticism, like we can't expect our desire to just be healthy if we're never feeding it with inspiration or we're feeding it with practice. Expand on that. Yeah. If I expect myself to just be the entrepreneur and work all day, every day, everything else goes out of balance. My hormones
will be impacted. My body will become more stiff. I will become very heady, and I won't be in tune with the body. The body's not open. The fascia is not open. Things can't flow. Eroticism, erotic energy needs to be able to flow. It needs that openness to flow. If I am spending time, and this is one of my practices, I write erotic poetry. I will sit and I will be in the space of envisioning and really feeling as I'm writing a story. I might touch myself. I might breathe. But I'm sipping on the nectar of these sexy stories.
There's so much alliteration in there, right there. It's just like, oh, that's juicy. So let me ask you because I've had a vision that's semi-serious. I'm actually semi-serious about this, of starting an OnlyFans account.
Dude, I was literally about to say that.
I was going to start an OnlyFans account called Bubble Bath Poetry.
Okay.
And where I actually candlelit in a bubble bath, no nudity, except maybe like side cheek getting in and out of the bath or something.
Obviously. Yeah.
But, and then I read or recite actually an erotic poem that I've written. And,
I love this.
And just like have that be, again, not nudity, but it is an erotic poetry read from a bubble bath. And so I'm really considering doing something like that as a way of keeping that spark alive, even for myself. I've never written erotic poetry. And it's funny that I've already turned it into a business instead of just doing it. Yeah. But I'm curious, what does that container look like? Because there's a lot of people that want to nurture, whether it's their inner artistry or their inner entrepreneur or their eroticism or whatever, but you have to create the container for it, right? Like you do need to create the space for it or give structure to how to do it. And when you're nurturing your eroticism to sit down and write poetry, or you can go into the entrepreneur artist realm, what does the container actually practically look like for you?
I mean, it doesn't, and that's where we're getting caught up in this structure. Structure can be helpful for many people who need that, but we need to be careful not to just segment away from what feels right too. So my creative expression and my erotic practices change all the time. So I'm constantly checking in with what I want, and the duration of them is very different. So that's one practice, and that might be 30 minutes long. But I also have where I can listen to an audible or an erotic story on Dipsy for like 5 minutes, and just really touch into that sexy, the sexy voice of a man on the other side of the story, or something, or have erotic images. I have my clients create erotic vision boards that they can keep going back to. But again, if we're not feeding ourselves with these different ideas, it's not, how do we expect it to be healthy? So we don't have to go into a whole formal practice. We can. That's beautiful and powerful. But we can also just have little snippets here and there. Even wearing something, like wearing a lingerie or wearing something that's really sexy and makes me feel good, can also feed that eroticism. Now, here's the point that I was trying to get to, in relationship to the entrepreneur and the erotic or the creative person, is that it's interesting to see how culture likes to segment these parts, as if sexuality is over here, sensuality is over here, and you are a professional. But that is an illusion. First of all, we can't actually compartmentalize ourselves as a sexual being. It's always there all the time. And so one feedback that I get from a lot of people is, you're a doctor and you're a psychotherapist and you are very sensual on your page, on your Instagram page. I've even been told that I'm a thirsty therapist. I'm like, but I really believe that I can take a stand for the integration of all these parts, so that we don't have to have shame when we just want to, when we're feeling ourselves and we're feeling sexy, or we're feeling sensual, or we want to demonstrate somebody being in their bodies. There's so much cultural conditioning around a woman being in her sensual expression, or wearing certain things, and then also wanting to be taken seriously. And so if we don't have anybody to demonstrate this for us, then how do we know? Or for a man to be in the bathtub and reading erotic poetry while you're also taken seriously as an entrepreneur, and people look up to you and the words that you do. And so how can we foster that? show that we just need to feed all these parts. And when we're feeling starving in one, can we just, instead of shaming ourselves, we just turn to it and we're like, you know what, this afternoon I'm just going to paint. You know, this afternoon I'm just going to be in ideation mode. Ideation is really, really important. You know, none of these empires that we build or these projects we create or these books are born from having no time. They are born from giving space for ideation and just being in the contemplation even before the idea is born.
Well, so I'd love to give you my reflection on that, because you were talking about sometimes the society can overvalue the structure and the need for structure. And sometimes it can be, it can look very different and just these things. And as an artist, I think that there can often be this romanticized idea of I create from a place of complete freedom. That's like that. I create from an infinite space. I tap into whatever wants to come through me. And yet every artist is only capable of pouring it in to a container of some kind. And that looks like a container of limitation, meaning there's a certain amount of frets on a guitar. There's a certain amount of keys on a piano. There's a certain size canvas for the painter. Like there is limitations put into place that are the structure that then the feminine energy comes into, which is, by the way, fractal to life itself, right? We have space-time as the structure that which creation emerges, right? And so I do think that if you look at how life has been created and you look at how art is actually created, there is a container needed to pour into. And so I've found it to be really important and valuable to embrace that and go, okay, what's the container I'm creating to pour my creativity into in this moment, instead of how I used to create, which is no limitations, no container, just this is like the moment of inspiration. And it's not that the container wasn't there. It was just that I wasn't seeing it necessarily. So, for example, you talked about putting on the lingerie or listening to whatever that audio porn thing is that you're talking about. Is my journal. I have a journal specifically to poetry. And so literally by taking that journal out and having my pen, I have a really nice Mont Blanc pen that is my thing. It's like that alone is, I'm now setting aside a container physically that holds this thing that I get to pour into. And so I'm just curious if you feel similarly, where it may not be okay, I'm carving out an hour of time with this sort of blah, 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 but there is a sort of classically conditioned way that you step into your creative energy.
I am a lot more of a wildcat than you are in that regards, but I do see what you're talking about in regards to these containers, so to say. I am in constant inspiration mode. And like if I see something, I put them in a folder of inspiration, and I have so many folders. I'm like the queen of organization in that regard. And that allows me to be so present to inspiration and just gathering things as it goes, put them in that folder. I don't know where it's going to happen. And then when I want to draw upon it, I pull those folders up in whatever format it is, and I spend time in it and I ideate. And then I pull from that. So I do have this process, but I have to be, I mean, it's because I'm interacting with the world and I'm very present to the world. I do the same thing. I do a very similar process with, I am inspired by something and I will write it all out. I'll write a whole outline out, and I have so many projects that will never see the light of day, but they inspire something that will be the finished product. And so I pull from all these hundreds of things that I've started that have had some sort of seedling, but haven't been finished because they're not supposed to be. So there is a level of me just being inspired and diving into it, seeing what comes out, and then letting it go when it feels done or dead, and then leaving it. I don't feel attached to it because oftentimes it will make sense in another way.
And so how do you identify the creative threads to keep pulling on? And when do you identify when it's time to let go of one and go, wow, I've been working on this for a while, but nope, time to let it go. How do you identify and navigate that?
It's a good question. I think for myself personally, it's just discernment. There are so many paintings I've spent months and months on, and they were beautiful. And then one day I looked at them and I was like, nope. And I just put a whole fresh coat of white all over it. And I started again with something entirely different. So there needs to be a level of, like the concept of Burning Man, unattachment, and recognizing when it's time to let it be turned into something else.
But can you expand on, because the discernment, yes, can you go into what that feels like in your body, or do you just, is it just an intuitive knowing, or is it a feeling of contraction? No. Intuition is different than a contraction. A contraction, I think we need to take the time to really sit with that and get curious from a space of compassion and curiosity and patience to understand, like, what is that part feeling, or what's the perspective of that part, like really unpacking that. But no, this is more of a intuitive, like, no, I'm done. Here's an example. I just repainted over this 3 foot by 3 foot painting that I had spent a considerable amount of time. It is a big painting. And I looked at that, and what came up for me was, my style is so different from that now. I don't want that to represent who I am today. And I don't feel the connection with it. I don't feel an emotional, it's literally like an object in that moment. And so in that sense, it is time. But there's some pieces that have a sentimental feeling to it, or there's a story to it, or there is still an aliveness to it. And those I keep. I don't necessarily know where they're going. They're still sitting on my wall, brushed up against my wall, but their lives aren't done yet. Well, that feels to me as part of generally I think that all creative ideas are searching for a home. They're searching for someone to birth them. And so that's why you'll hear about how a number of people start working on projects similarly at the same time.
Yeah.
And
it's all
history,
coming through.
It's coming
us,
through,
yeah.
and we're tapped in. Yeah. And it's basically going, who's going to take action on this? And if you don't take action on it, great, I'll find another mom or another dad. And so, and I found that for myself, there's been so many ideas that even I started, or art projects that I started. And if I don't finish them at a certain point, they're gone. And so when you're talking about the just intuitive sense of, nope, this is done here. Now, where do you ever wonder or come up against if it's actually done, or it's your own fear, doubt, insecurity, limiting belief, self-sabotage mechanisms? Because I know that in my life, there are certain patterns that I've had where I get super excited. I'm a big early stage guy. I love the ideas, and I love the final stages too. The middle stages are where I lose a lot of steam. Yeah. And so I can get it going, be like, I'm so excited for this thing. And then suddenly I hit that same spot over and over where I go, maybe this isn't the thing. Maybe this isn't. Maybe I should go to this thing. But I'm even in the active question for myself of, when I feel that, is it because something's actually off and it's not the thing, and the thing that's 100% right would be something that I would maintain my momentum through? Or do I keep hitting a certain wound, trauma from the past, like, et cetera, and that's what's causing me to feel that resistance in this particular stage of creation? Yeah. And it's important for me to keep moving through that, as opposed to saying, nope, I've just lost the motivation, so I'm going to move on to the next thing. How do you navigate that? Yeah.
So there are some things where I come up against the fear, and I'm like, oh my God, nobody's going to want this. Nobody's going to sign up for this. Nobody's going to whatever. And that's a very real feeling in the body. It feels like I'm managing like a contraction in the body. But sometimes I just don't have all the information to complete it. And so sometimes I do need to step away, or I need to go on a trip, or I need to go and have a conversation with somebody that I don't know who the person is that I'm supposed to have this conversation with. I'm engaging in life. And in life, those pieces will make sense in this. So there's a model that I recently came up with. I've been working on for 2 years, and it's called aerosynthesis. And it's this concept for sex and psychedelics to synthesize these erotic practices using our breath, our sound, our movement, our visualization, our touch that I've learned from Tantra and BDSM and trauma therapy. But then I also, and it made more sense when I started going into the mythology, Greek mythology, and I discovered these archetypes that created a container for what I was trying to create here, or communicate to people, give to people, and through that, I use the archetypes of cosmos and chaos. Cosmos is the structure, the structure of the universe, and chaos is the void and this unbridled energy that we can access as this erotic life force energy. And so I didn't have all those pieces to start with. That took 2 years to discover. Actually, even longer than that, because I've studied Tantra, like over a decade ago. And so it's along the way I have these pieces. I teach this class. I read this thing. And it all goes into my millions of folders that I have. And then all of a sudden I'll have a conversation with somebody and I'll be like, oh, tell me what did you just say there, right there? And then now it clicks. Oh, okay. That makes sense. That gives me the exact model that I'm wanting to go into, or how I want to express that to people. And then I write that down. And then a few months later, I experience something at, in Ibiza. And I'm like, whoa, this feeling, that's what I'm looking for. And I write that down, or I come across a story, so that I'm constantly, it's always open and available there, is what I'm saying. And sometimes I don't know if something is completely dead, or if I just step away and it needs to mature. My understanding needs to mature. My experience needs to mature. Life needs to give me something. So
I love that, because it's very fractal to just, even for me, the writing of a single poem. Going, I don't know where this goes next.
Yes.
And so I'm just going to have to, my relationship to that is very intuitive. The way that I describe it is I've developed a relationship to my creative muse where I know when she's present and I know when she's not. And I can just feel that difference. And so to be writing a poem and feel like the muse has just left me, and I go, okay, well, that means that it's not in me. Meaning, like, I need to go experience life. There's something I need to experience, or there needs to be a physiological shift in how I'm thinking or seeing. And that needs to happen in order for me to know where the poem goes next. So I need to set it aside. And then there's other moments where it's I've hit a kind of dead end, it feels like, but the muse is here and I can feel I just need to sit in that fire a little bit and let my brain do the algorithms of where it can go. And what you just described to me is the same process, but just kind of on a more life day-to-day scale of I'm present to when the muse is here, and when it strikes, instead of a line of poetry, it's a thing that goes into one of these folders. And so you've created actually structure to hold your creative inspiration. And because you've created this sort of macro structure, it allows you to be even more present to just the inspiration in the moment, because you have this structure that's holding you, which I think is a really cool way of going about it. Because again, my whole thing about like being an artistic entrepreneur is this merge of these two, and hearing how this sort of meta structure of these folders actually frees you up to be in that more present, feminine, receptive, artistic energy. Yeah.
And the number of times I was in a dance, at Burning Man, or a dance at a party or something like that, and inspiration hit me, and I was like, oh, that's what I was looking for. And I would squat down in the middle of a crowd and just like get on my phone and write the thing down, and be like, and I'd be down here like, okay, be with it. Okay, what is it? And people would be dancing around me like.
You're like, wait, I have to stay focused because my psychedelics are going to take me in a whole different direction.
I mean, how do you know I'm on psychedelics?
We've had plenty of great Burning Man dances.
We've had plenty of great Burning Man dances.
Yeah, sober.
Absolutely.
You're one of my favorite people to dance with. Yeah.
Same. It is like a psychedelic experience. It is. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that for me right now, the focus that is such a part of my life is how do I do what you're describing more and more and more, which is how do I allow the structure to hold my artist? Because that can happen in a lot of different ways. And I just really appreciate you're broadening my perspective of like zooming out to a discipline that you've created for yourself to just feel as if all of your creative ideas have a space, they have a place to live. And that nurtures them. That tells the muse, hey, I'm always listening. I'm always receptive. Please let me know. And I think that when we go too far in the arena of, say, entrepreneur mind and the doing, then the muse feels as if there's no space for her. And so just even to have these folders, there's a knowing in your body that there's always space.
Yeah.
And I think that's huge. I think that's a really big thing that I hope people are getting as they're listening to this.
Yeah. And, it's also interesting. I want to emphasize this because Rick Rubin wrote an incredible book about the creative process. And one thing that he emphasized is that every single person has their own process and we can be inspired by each other, but don't think that just the way that you're doing it is the wrong way because there's many artists who need to go in a specific emotion and they need to feel depressed to feel like that's their wellspring of creative process. And that's theirs. If that's what they want to do, great. Yeah. And so mine looks like
hasn't been
this.
Me.
Yeah.
No.
Now I also know. I have also been therapist to many artists and many entrepreneurs too. I have had artists come in and feel really stuck and blocked and a lot of shame around that too. And then the ketamine therapy that we did was really powerful in opening that back up and finding themselves and then finding the inspiration again. I've also worked with entrepreneurs who are very good at being open to the creative process inspiration wise. However, it's also so heady and they struggle with the sexuality part of it or anchoring it into their body side of it too. So it's just like my invitation for everybody is to find the balance and nurture and feed all of their parts of themselves, not just what they deem entrepreneur or what they deem creative, because these other parts of us also contribute. The health of our body makes it so that we can be more inspired. And to be able to think more clearly, or the health of our the connection with our spirituality. The connection with our emotions, the connection with our relationships. So if we think of this whole process like a medicine wheel and how the interweaving of all of these different parts, how are we feeding them? And that's ultimately going to keep the eros, the creative inspiration alive, like a living entity in ourselves.
Do you dive into each of those intentionally? So meaning for a while, for example, my morning routine, I look at it as physical, mental, emotional, spiritual.
Cool.
And so I go, okay, what do I do in my mornings that nurture and awaken each part, each body? So oftentimes that will look like, okay, physical, put my feet in the earth and body in the sun and hydrate, right? Okay, great. Mental. Oftentimes that is journaling is a big one for me. Emotional. I believe it or not, dancing has been my thing while I've been in Boulder. And it's just it's a great way where elevate my mood every time I dance, no matter what, as long as I can get to that place. It might be like a bit of a minute or a song of resistance a little bit, but like once I actually get into the dance, then my mood always elevates. So that's a good one for me. And then spiritual prayer, meditation, saying, you know, a sun salutation or something, right? Yeah. And so I've designed it, and there's a lot of freedom and flexibility to it. So maybe more time stretching, maybe I write a poem, maybe I read or play guitar or something. So it can vary, but I did have the structure of, okay, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual every morning to come. Do you have that same thing? Do you think about it that specifically? Cause you just spoke to a number of things on your medicine wheel.
Yeah. My medicine wheel is throughout a day. Okay. So it's not just in the morning, because in the morning I may have another part of me that needs attention. And so some mornings, if I tried to do, you know, like your practice, I'm using yours as an example, but there's a part of me that really needs to finish a podcast preparation. I'm not going to be able to be fully present in this thing until I take care of that, and then I can come around here. So I would say it's more of me tuning into what's alive and allowing that to make my decisions. But each of those things are met in a day.
Got it. Because for me, I think that once I get going, you know what I mean? As soon as I get on that computer or turn my phone on, and I'm in that mindset and I go, and it's this momentum snowball that picks up throughout the day. Sure. And I also kind of have this belief that if I wake up and immediately get to work on something that I planned from the day before, I haven't given myself space to become the new me yet. So my neurology and physiology and all of that is still going to be carrying who I was and what I set in motion as an old version of myself. And so by waking up and giving myself at least even 30 minutes, I create the opportunity for me maybe to integrate what happened in my dream state. I get to shift into a more intentional, emotional state, all of those sorts of things before I go into continuing momentum from the past. I feel as if I'm being more intentional with wanting to evolve day to day.
Beautiful. Yeah. For me, it's okay. I wake up and I'm like, okay, there's this thing that needs to happen. I always do some sort of like water, electrolytes. You know, I have a whole ritual with coffee, tea, whatever it is. Yeah. And then I sit down and I give that part its attention. And then I'm like, and then when I finish that, I'm like, okay, now I can go sit at my altar and be able to meditate more deeply, because this isn't poking me in the back, right? So sometimes it's that, or I have a deck that I can go and sit outside and be in nature for 5 minutes in between clients, or, you know, so it's integrated throughout my day. It's not segmented for me. And I think that's just, but each of those parts are met in some way.
So what do you find if you had 5 minutes and you have been in, and you want to shift state and tap into a more expansive, more creative, like retouch to that part of yourself? Yeah. How do you use that 5 minutes?
Depends.
Okay.
Because sometimes I'll just literally lay on the floor and let myself be so grounded, literally grounded on the floor flat, because that's what I need. I need to downregulate. I need to just be open. And then sometimes if there's a restless energy, sometimes I get up and I do like what you did and I dance. There are periods of time when the creative process is flowing so strongly for me that I don't want to not be writing poetry. And I'll be like, I'll be writing up until 5 minutes before a client and then be like, I don't want to leave this. But I need to be present for that person. So I'll sit and I'll do some sort of like meditation or let my body shake or do something and then be present for them. And then I transition out and then I write again. But I want to emphasize the importance of transitions. These transitions are so, so important. You know, how are we finding silence, stillness, or a change in between each activity so that we're not carrying in whatever from an activity before into something that's now we're no longer present to, fully present.
It's funny because that's how I think about my mornings and the day before.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah.
So then what So the Artistic Entrepreneur Program that I do has 5 modules, and I have a question for you at each of them because I want to understand how you relate in your own way. So I'm going to take you through it, right? The first module is about identifying a core conflict, and so that you can remove that block and actually align more deeply with the vision that you have. And I've addressed the inner artist, inner entrepreneur conflict inside of myself that has been pretty much a core conflict that has created a lot of struggle throughout the years until I've realized, wow, that is a conflict. And I've been able to actually do a great job of bringing them into harmony. And I'm curious for you, what has been a core conflict that you've really identified within yourself along the journey of what you've built and how you've kind of moved through that?
Well, the first one that comes to mind was this being a doctor, licensed, I'm a published researcher, I hold down the science, but then I'm also super silly. I'm very kinky. I'm very, inappropriate in ways, silly, playful, sensual, sexy, all of that. And then I'm also an artist. I wrote a book on poetry. I didn't write a book on academia. So that was a big, vulnerability of mine of like, here's this poetry book that I just needed to write.
It was beautiful. I recommend everyone go get it.
Thank you. So the integration of being all of these parts, like so many aspects of myself and letting them all be in a single person. What has been the biggest thing that's helped you kind of move through that and bring them into integration? Or is it still a ongoing dance? It's still an ongoing dance. Like, here's an example. I post a video online, and it's something about how I was on stage. I was speaking on sex and psychedelics. And then somebody came up to me afterward trying to tell me why kink, and I literally only referred to BDSM, but they were telling me how that's unhealthy for women, especially a woman like a goddess like I was, and then started to go down this whole and I interrupted him and I was like, listen, you're not going to be able to sway me on why that's not okay for me. So I get met with a lot of stigma around these different parts of me. And so I have to pause, and I really have to resource myself and ground and remind myself that most people don't have the models of how somebody can be all these things at the same time, and to be somebody who's also deeply invested in her own personal spirituality and evolution and growth, and but also is like kinky as fuck.
And so someone listening to this right now that feels they have these parts that seem like they're in conflict, or they're worried how they'll be polarizing, what would be your advice to them?
I think the best thing is to remember that everybody is limited to what they've experienced in their lives. And how can I respond to people with curiosity rather than driving forward with more conflict or trying to prove somebody, but more soften and ask. If you read my comments, that's always how I start. Or I find something that feels valid in what they say, even if it really called me out. And I'll say, wow, I'm going to sit with that and reflect with that. And I could have done a better job of explaining the nuance there, and I can see how that was misinterpreted. So most of the time people aren't, and there's the occasional troll. And can I also say, I also told somebody that was unconsensual, and I would appreciate it. Or what did I say? Please don't do that again. So there's a level of, the nuance of, can I have mental boundaries and say, nope, I'm not going to engage in that conversation anymore. I don't have to politely stand here and listen to why you think that my sexual preferences is unhealthy, but also, and know the difference between, I can be curious about this and hold this reflection. So I don't really have like a black or white answer. This is part of the dance. I think it's part of the dance. I also think, I guess my advice would be community, because I feel as when it becomes hard and I get haters or whatever,
I have community. I have people that, one, I can go to actually for a reality check too. Be like, hey, did I overstep here?
You do it with me all the time.
I do it with you all the time. I absolutely. I released a poem that was kind of speaking to what was happening over in Gaza, and got like, I angered a lot of people. I called up a couple friends of mine and I said, hey, I'd love to know your perspective. Do you think I'm spiritually bypassing right now? I would love to hear what you think. And just having those conversations from people that I trust, who know me and love me and respect me and aren't like projecting all this stuff, and then going, okay, and what are people actually saying? Similar to you. What are people actually saying here? And let me like go into almost a logical, theoretical proof of their different arguments and see what actually could be true and different things. And let me examine my own beliefs around this again. And I think that's healthy. I think that's normal, or something that I would encourage more people to do. And so for me, that answer is community, because we are going to come up, especially if we're pushing our edges, we're going to come up against times where we might need some refinement and we just need mirrors. And I think it's more powerful to have that from people who we know love us and support us and are not going to be sitting in judgment of us, versus trying to find our way through the comments of your Instagram or something like that. So
now here's the hard part, and here's where we can take it exactly that, because that's important. It creates safety, and expand it more, because I also believe that there's echo chambers that we keep finding ourselves in. And here's the piece that really grates on me a lot. Because I work a lot with people who have alternative styles of relationships, whether it's open, poly, whatever the fuck they want. Helping them to find what's most authentic for them and moving through that. And the number of times that I've seen, these conscious, whatever, Instagram profiles that are like,
I angered one of them.
I clearly have a visceral response here. But where they're saying like polyamory doesn't work. And the question that I put to that is, you haven't been a part of any of the communities where it beautifully does. And so all they're seeing is reference points of how it doesn't work, of how it blows up. I've had conversations with psychologists about this too. They're like, I've never seen it in my office. And I'm like, well, that's because you don't have the training. You don't have the worldview of seeing how it can work, or you know the nuances of how to support people in that. So you're just in an echo chamber when you turn to your friend and they're like, yeah, I've never seen it work either. Turn to another friend in your community. Yeah, no, that's bullshit. It's just bypassing or whatever. But can we also remember that there's diversity in other communities? So how are we bridging to other communities with an open mind of seeing how it can work, and it does?
Yeah.
And that's just one.
Meanwhile, monogamy has a failure rate of that's right. Like, so it's like massive. And I got into a whole back and forth with a sort of like spiritual influencer, mainly because I didn't like how they made it a spiritual hierarchy.
Yeah.
I didn't like when suddenly the frame of it is the only path to true spiritual union is monogamy. Like that is basically creating a spiritual moral hierarchy based off of preferences. And that bothered me. And so because you
and I've had those exact conversation together about the hierarchy.
I'm not polyamorous, but I still think that your path is your path.
Right. And that's such a clue for us all to pay attention to, this pattern of hierarchy across all aspects of life. Even when I get into, I've had people on my podcast where they're plant medicine facilitators, and then they judge ketamine, and I've been in these conversations of people who make hierarchy plant medicine and make this MDMA or LSD synthetics. Synthetics as lower than. And what they don't realize, there's many things that they're not realizing. I believe in animism. The spirit exists in all things, including inanimate objects. But also there's this, and that's my belief, but why would we place a hierarchy that might be the medicine for somebody? Because they can't do this, their bodies can't break down ayahuasca, but now they have shame around ketamine, so they won't do that. Or because they're doing medications, they can't do any of these other ones, and so then they don't because they're afraid of the shame. And the same thing with like hierarchy in beauty culture too, where people are put on the hierarchy of natural beauty is better than somebody who wants to change something. It's like, how are we creating all this divisiveness? And that's disempowering people. This is a game of power. I know this is the right way and you don't have it, and you're doing this wrong, and that's why you're in pain and why you're suffering and blah, 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 blah. Like it just, and that inhibits creative process.
100%. And so that first module of identifying the inner core conflict, which I really appreciate your share. And then we go into the second one, which is really about developing a 100% certainty offer. And so what that means is the thing that you know with 100% certainty that the right person coming in contact with it will have their life changed. You like know that you can bring that to the right person. And I'm curious for you, what is the thing that you have that 100% certainty about just with that right person? What do you walk through the world and feel a knowing of embodiment that you bring?
I don't know how to put that into. Can you give me an example of that? Like how would you?
Yeah. So for example, with like my artistic entrepreneur program, I 100% know that the person who is really good at their craft, they have something that they've really developed a mastery around. And people are already paying them for it. So it's proven and they've seen the results and they know it, that person who has not yet been able to go from like good to great, I can get them to great. Where I've struggled is the people who have no idea really what they even want to offer and they haven't really developed that thing. And so I know that my skill set and what I've been able to do, like I can take that person from there to there, and I have 100% certainty around that. Those are the clients that I work with one-on-one. That's how I know from years of doing it.
Got it.
And so I have that certainty. And I'm curious the certainty that you have around something.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I would say my certainty is I'm very good at bringing people out of deep trauma states and working through that and helping them access the pleasure in their body again. I'm very good at that. And some of these deeper, more complex traumas take a while. But because of the certainty I have in that, it's like they're able to stay with me through that process to be able to, until they find that.
You're really
patience.
great at that. You're really great. You've done it for me.
Thank you.
And so then third module is once you have that certainty and you've released kind of that core conflict, you now move into this third stage, which is where you can craft signature content, which for me is about content that really captures the essence of you. So that people see it and they just like feel you. They really get that for you. And I'm curious if you have anything that you feel like you now have that really captures that for you.
Yes. I feel very soft in my body and like I have a very healthy nervous system now. I didn't used to. And so my courses and my offerings and things, they revolve a lot around the health of the nervous system and the body, and teaching you sensuality from this place of like how to find that from the inside and find calmness. Because I come from deep trauma. So I understand the frustration of taking a course about like, let's teach you about sex and sensuality. And I'm like, I can't access any of that shit because I'm not there. So I would say, really bringing people out of those states.
And so then one thing you've done really well in this kind of the fourth module I call dating your audience, which is about how do you create real authentic relationships with your audience. And I feel that you've done that really, really well. For anyone who's wanting to build their audience, what would be your advice around building authentic relationships with your social media?
I mean, for me, it's like I'm very playful, but I'm also intelligent. And so there's just a fluidity of these different parts of me coming out all the time in my content. Like You're
just authentic.
I'm just authentic. I'm just myself out there. It's the same. It's not, I'm not filtering any of that. And I'll
add that you have actual embodied knowledge and wisdom that you bring to it. It's not just fun. You bring that part of your personality, but there's so much value that you provide into your content as well.
There's a balance there.
Which then leads into the fifth module, final question here, which is around how do you build a monetization ecosystem? So just now the entrepreneur in you that's building the team and the funnels and the different aspects of that, your journey with that, because there's a lot of people listening to this that have their thing and want it, and and just how do you approach the actual building of a business?
I mean, you've heard me in this process so many times. Like at the beginning, it was like throwing a lot of things at the wall and seeing what sticks. But then I learned to get back into the foundations and the basics and the structure and restructuring the foundation. But I don't know. I think it's a blend of doing things that I just thoroughly enjoy because that gives me energy, and then balancing that out with delegating to people and finding the right people to delegate that with.
Finding the right people is so crucial.
It's so fucking
It's its own skill. It's something that we actually teach inside the program because it is its own thing to find the right person, but to know what position you're hiring for really and that sort of thing. Yeah.
And to constantly have a relationship with them and check in with them when you see things falling apart, like checking in with them. Do I need to restructure you in another place? Or is there something you're more excited about? So staying in connection with their excitements too, and be willing to shift them into something that they'll be more motivated in. I've had to do that many times too. And then learn not to overwhelm somebody with too many types of things, but one thing at a time. Yeah.
Moving from solopreneur to business owner with team is its own skill set that needs to be learned. So 100%. Well, Kat, I love you so much. I'm so grateful we got a chance to do this. And I would love it if you can share with people where they can get more of you, follow you, find out what you're up to.
Yeah, they can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Kat Meyer, and they can go to my website, drkatmeyer.com or sexloveyoga.com.
There it is. Well, thank you so much for being on the Creative Path podcast. Thank you to everybody who's joined us and gone on the Creative Path with us today. I really encourage you also to check out her poetry book. It's beautiful. She's illustrated it. It's like so good. And I hope you're really proud of it still. It's so good. And thank you for everyone. If you've gotten value from this, please share it out. Tag us. Let us know like the biggest takeaway you had from this episode, because that helps us just continue to know what's resonating with the audience and how we can give you more value. Because that's what we're here for, in ways that feel good and authentic. And I appreciate you. And I want to remind all of you that always, in all ways, you are seen, you are heard, and you are loved. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you taking the time. If you are interested in building a life that you love through the 3 pillars of relationship, business, and creativity, then I encourage you to continue checking out more of my content, including this video, which I really think that you will like.